They say the mind is the first thing to go, that it slips away quietly, like a tide pulling back from the shore, taking your memories, your sharpness, your very identity out into the dark water until nothing is left but an empty shell. But they lie. It doesn't slip away quietly. It is stolen, siphoned off, drop by the people who smile at you while pouring your tea. My name is Josephine Sterling. For 35 years, I built Sterling Real Estate and Development from a single rundown duplex on the south side of Chicago into a multi-billion-dollar empire. I fought off ruthless developers, corrupt city officials, and men who thought a black woman had no place sitting at the head of a boardroom table. I fought tooth and nail for every square inch of my legacy, and I won every war I ever waged. But sitting in my wheelchair, staring out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the freezing gray expanse of Lake Michigan, I couldn't even remember what day of the week it was. The fog in my head was thick. It was a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket wrapped tightly around my brain. Thoughts would form, sharp, urgent thoughts about my company, about my bank accounts, about my beautiful daughter, Aaliyah. But before I could speak them, they would dissolve into a white, buzzing static. Josephine, sweetheart, it's time. The voice was like warm honey, smooth, meticulously practiced, and utterly hollow. DeAndre Rollins, my husband, my second husband. We had been married for 5 years. He was 16 years my junior, a former corporate defense attorney with a smile that could disarm a judge and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's homes. When we met, I thought he was a breath of fresh air after the crushing, lingering grief of losing my first husband. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly devoted to me. Now, looking at him through the chemical haze clouding my eyes, he looked like the Grim Reaper in a tailored Tom Ford suit. "How are we feeling this evening, Joe?" DeAndre asked, his voice dripping with that unbearable, condescending sympathy he reserved for when the household staff was within earshot. He stepped in front of the window, deliberately blocking my view of the lake, forcing my world to shrink down to just him. I opened my mouth to tell him to move, to tell him I wasn't a child. But what came out was a slow, slurred whisper. "Tired, DeAndre, my head is so heavy." He sighed, a perfectly calibrated sound of a weary, devoted caregiver. He knelt beside my chair, taking my cold, trembling hand in his warm one. The scent of his expensive cologne made my stomach turn. "I know, my love. Dr. Vance said the new Alzheimer's medication might make you a little drowsy, but we have to stick to the regimen. Your cognitive decline." "Joe, it's getting faster. You didn't even recognize the accountant this morning." I blinked, trying to pierce through the static in my brain. The accountant? Had Elias been here? Panic flared in my chest, a primal, terrified bird batting its wings against my ribs. I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember a single thing from the morning. "You signed the temporary medical proxy, remember?" DeAndre's thumb stroked the back of my hand, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "Just like we discussed, to make sure the company is safe while you rest." "You did the right thing, Joe." Proxy? The word echoed in the empty caverns of my mind. I signed a proxy? Giving him control of my life's work? My heart hammered against my sternum, but my limbs felt like lead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand to see the papers. But the fog rolled in again, thick and heavy, whispering that I was just confused, that I was sick, that DeAndre was taking care of me. "Here," DeAndre murmured, picking up a small porcelain dish from the silver tray he had brought in. "Take your medicine. It will help you sleep." He held out 2 small, chalky white pills, the architects of my demise. I reached for them with a shaking hand. I didn't want to take them. Every instinct I had left, buried deep beneath the chemical snowstorm in my brain, screamed at me to knock the tray to the floor. But the drug he'd given me that morning was still in my system, rendering me docile, robbing me of my agency. Just as my fingers brushed the pills, a shadow moved in the doorway. "Excuse me, Mr. Rollins," a quiet voice said. It was Naya. She had been my housekeeper for 15 years. She was a silent, observant woman who moved through the massive Sterling estate like a ghost. She knew every secret this house held, and she knew exactly how I liked my coffee, my linens, and my life arranged. Lately, DeAndre had been trying to fire her. He complained that she was getting too old, too slow, too set in her ways. But even in my compromised state, I had adamantly refused. Nia was my last tether to the real world before the fog completely consumed me. DeAndre's jaw tightened, a microscopic crack in his perfect veneer. He hated being interrupted. What is it, Nia? Can't you see I'm attending to my wife? The heating system in the east wing is acting up again, sir, Nia said, stepping further into the dimly lit room. Her eyes flicked toward me just for a fraction of a second before dropping respectfully to the floor. The technician is on the phone. He needs your authorization to order the replacement part. Tell him to wait, DeAndre snapped, not hiding his annoyance. He said if you don't authorize the payment now, the pipes might freeze overnight, sir. It's dropping below 0. DeAndre exhaled sharply through his nose. He placed the porcelain dish with the 2 white pills directly onto my lap. Fine, I'll deal with it. He turned to me, his smile snapping back into place like a stretched rubber band. Take your pills, Joe. Swallow them down. I'll be right back. He stood up, turning his back to me as he pulled his phone from his pocket, already barking arrogant orders as he walked toward the hallway. Tell him I'm coming to the phone. And Nia, clean up the ashes by the fireplace. It's a mess. Yes, Mr. Rollins, Nia murmured. She stepped forward toward the grand fireplace, stopping right beside my wheelchair. DeAndre was already in the hallway, his voice echoing off the marble floors, entirely focused on his own perceived authority. Nia reached for the heavy brass fire poker. As she did, her elbow jerked backward, hard. It hit the edge of the silver tray resting on the side table. The tray tipped. The crystal glass of water DeAndre had poured for me shattered onto the hardwood floor with a sharp, explosive crash. Damn it, Nia! DeAndre's voice echoed from the hall. I could hear his heavy footsteps marching quickly back toward the living room. What did you do? I'm so sorry, sir. I slipped, Nia said, her voice trembling slightly as she immediately dropped to her knees to gather the broken glass with her bare hands. In that split second of chaos, as the glass shattered and DeAndre yelled, a sudden, sharp jolt of adrenaline pierced the thick fog in my brain. It was a pure reflex, an old survival instinct from a woman who had spent decades outsmarting predators on the streets and in the boardrooms. Before DeAndre stepped back into the room, my trembling hand snatched the 2 white pills from my lap. I didn't swallow them. I shoved them deep under my tongue, clamping my jaw shut so tightly my teeth ached. DeAndre appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with genuine anger. He looked at the shattered glass, then at Nia kneeling submissively on the floor, and finally at me. He looked at the empty porcelain dish resting on my lap. Did you take them, Joe? He asked, his eyes narrowing slightly, searching my face for any sign of defiance. I nodded slowly, letting my head loll back against the leather of the wheelchair. I forced my eyes to look vacant, unfocused, staring right through him. I kept my mouth tightly closed, tasting the bitter, chalky poison beginning to dissolve against the floor of my mouth, fighting the urge to gag. Good, DeAndre muttered, his irritation subsiding into a smug, chilling satisfaction. He turned his attention back to Nia. Clean this up immediately, and don't disturb us again for the rest of the night. He walked over, pressed a cold kiss to my forehead, and wheeled me toward the master bedroom. The entire way down the long, silent corridor, I kept my tongue pressed hard against the roof of my mouth, holding the pills in place, tasting death. Once he helped me into bed, pulled the heavy duvet over me and turned off the lights, he closed the door, leaving me alone in the pitch black. I waited. I counted to 100 in the dark. Then I turned my head, spat the half-dissolved pills into a tissue from the nightstand, and shoved it deep inside my pillowcase. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It didn't happen all at once. It took hours of agonizing patience in the dark. But somewhere around 3 a.m., I felt it. The fog began to lift. It was like watching a heavy velvet curtain being drawn back from a window. The persistent static in my brain quieted. The suffocating weight on my chest evaporated into the cold night air. Sensation returned to my fingertips. My memories, sharp, vivid, and completely intact, flooded back into my consciousness with breathtaking clarity. I remembered the morning perfectly. I remembered that I hadn't signed a temporary medical proxy. DeAndre had guided my hand while I was heavily sedated, my eyes barely open. He had forged the intent. He was laying the legal groundwork to strip me of everything I owned. I sat up in bed. The room spun slightly, a lingering, nauseating withdrawal from whatever synthetic nightmare he had been pumping into my veins for the last few months, but my mind was crystal clear. I didn't have early-onset Alzheimer's. I wasn't suffering from rapidly progressing dementia. I was being systematically poisoned by the man sleeping in the guest room down the hall. A cold, terrifying realization washed over me. The confusion was gone, replaced by a rage so profound, so absolute, it felt like liquid fire in my veins. He was stealing my company. He was erasing my life, forcing me to watch from the passenger seat as he drove my legacy off a cliff. But worse than the money, worse than the betrayal, as the mental fog completely cleared, a singular, agonizing thought slammed into me. 6 months ago, my beautiful daughter Aaliyah's car was found abandoned near the edge of the dense, treacherous woods of the Cook County Forest Preserves. The police said she must have wandered off after a crash. The search dogs lost her scent. They told me she was gone, and in my drugged, grief-stricken state, I had believed them. If DeAndre was capable of this, of slowly, methodically erasing my mind to steal my empire, what was he capable of doing to the sole heir of that empire? I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. The matriarch of the Sterling family was finally awake, and it was time to hunt. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet, but the cold was exactly what I needed. It was a sharp, biting anchor to reality. I stood beside the heavy mahogany bed for a long moment, gripping the thick wooden bedpost to steady my trembling legs. My muscles felt atrophied, lethargic from months of forced sedation, but the adrenaline surging through my veins was a powerful antidote. I glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:14 a.m. The Sterling mansion was completely silent. It was a sprawling 30-room stone estate in the affluent northern suburbs of Chicago, a fortress I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears 2 decades ago. Now it felt like a mausoleum. I moved toward the bedroom door, my steps slow and agonizingly deliberate. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I eased the door open and stepped out into the grand, dimly lit corridor. Down the hall, the door to the guest suite was slightly ajar. I crept toward it, pressing my back against the cool silk wallpaper. From inside, I could hear the slow, rhythmic sound of DeAndre's breathing. He was sleeping soundly, peacefully, dreaming of the empire he was stealing while the woman he was slowly killing slept just a few doors away. A wave of hatred so visceral washed over me that my hands curled into tight fists. I wanted to march into that room and wrap my hands around his throat. I wanted to watch his arrogant, charming eyes widen in terror as he realized the matriarch was wide awake. But I was outmatched physically, and more importantly, I was outmatched legally. He had the forged medical proxy. He had the corrupt doctors. If I confronted him now, he would simply call his hired medical staff, claim I was having a violent paranoid dementia episode, and have me permanently committed to a locked psychiatric ward before the sun came up. No. If you want to kill a snake, you don't step on its tail. You cut off its head. And to do that, I needed evidence. I turned away from his door and made my way toward the grand staircase. The moonlight spilled through the massive arched window on the landing, casting long skeletal shadows across the marble steps. I gripped the wrought iron railing, descending slowly into the cavernous darkness of the ground floor. I needed to get into his study. I needed to see his laptop, his bank statements, whatever correspondence he was having with the people providing the drugs. I reached the ground floor and moved silently through the formal dining room, the heavy oak table looking like an island in a sea of shadows. As I passed through the butler's pantry toward the east wing, the area Nia had mentioned earlier, a sudden chill swept over my bare ankles. The east wing housed the library, DeAndre's new study, and at the very end of the corridor, the heavy oak door leading down to the subterranean wine cellar. I approached DeAndre's study first. I reached for the brass handle, praying he had been careless. I pressed down, locked. A solid, unyielding click. I noticed a small, newly installed biometric scanner just above the handle. He had turned my own house into a heavily fortified vault against me. Frustration burned in the back of my throat. I stepped back, my foot brushing against the thick Persian runner rug that stretched down the corridor. As I shifted my weight, something hard pressed sharply into the arch of my bare foot. I gasped softly, biting my lip to stifle the sound. I stepped back and knelt on the rug, my hands frantically smoothing over the intricate woven patterns in the dim light. My fingers brushed against something small, cold, and smooth. I picked it up and held it toward the sliver of moonlight filtering through the corridor window. It was a piece of broken jade, a small, intricately carved lotus flower, snapped cleanly down the middle. The air vanished from my lungs. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. I knew this lotus. I had commissioned it from a jeweler in Hong Kong 20 years ago. I had fastened it around my daughter Aaliyah's neck on her 18th birthday. She never took it off. It was her talisman, a piece of me she carried everywhere. The police had told me they found nothing but her shattered phone in her abandoned car 6 months ago. They said the woods had swallowed her. So why was half of her jade lotus sitting on the floor of my east wing corridor, right in front of the door leading to the wine cellar? My hands began to shake so violently I almost dropped the stone. I crawled toward the heavy oak door of the cellar. The chill in the air was stronger here. I grabbed the iron ring handle and pulled. It didn't budge. Where there used to be a simple antique brass lock, there was now a sleek black digital keypad, glowing with a faint, menacing red light. DeAndre had changed the locks to the cellar. He had claimed he was having the climate control system upgraded to protect my vintage Bordeaux collection. I had been too foggy at the time to question it. I stared at the glowing red numbers. If I entered the wrong code, it might trigger a silent alarm on DeAndre's phone upstairs. But I couldn't walk away, not with Aaliyah's jade in my hand. I thought about DeAndre. He was a man defined by his own ego. He thought he was the smartest person in any room. He thought he had completely erased my presence from this house. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. 20 years ago, when I first bought this estate, I had the entire internal wiring gutted and replaced. I had a master override system installed into the literal framework of the house, independent of any commercial security software he could have purchased. I closed my eyes, digging deep past the lingering fog, pulling up a memory from 2 decades ago. 6 digits. I opened my eyes, raised a trembling finger, and typed the numbers into the keypad. Beep, 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 beep. For a second, nothing happened. Then the red light flashed green. A heavy mechanical click echoed from inside the door frame. I pulled the iron ring. The heavy oak door swung open with a soft, ominous groan. The cold, damp air of the subterranean cellar hit my face, smelling of old wood, dust, and fermented grapes. I stepped onto the stone spiral staircase, closing the heavy door behind me until it clicked shut, plunging me into pitch darkness. I felt my way down the cold stone wall, step by agonizing step. At the bottom, I fumbled for the light switch. A row of dim amber Edison bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the cavernous cellar. Row upon row of expensive wines sat undisturbed in their floor-to-ceiling wooden racks. It looked exactly as it always had. A perfectly normal, incredibly expensive wine cellar. But as I moved deeper into the room, my bare feet detected a subtle change in the texture of the stone floor. I looked down. Scuff marks. Deep, repetitive scratches in the ancient stone, arcing in a perfect quarter circle right in front of the massive custom-built shelving unit at the very back of the room. A rack that held hundreds of heavy bottles. It had been moved. Frequently. I walked up to the towering wooden rack. I pressed my hands flat against the thick oak frame and pushed. It didn't move. I gritted my teeth, summoning every ounce of strength left in my battered 64-year-old body. I pushed harder, my bare feet slipping against the stone. With a low, scraping grind, the entire shelving unit, mounted on heavy-duty, concealed industrial casters, swung outward like a massive door. Behind it was not the stone foundation of the house. Behind it was a modern, heavy steel door, the kind used for panic rooms. There was no lock on the outside, only a heavy steel latch. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. My hand hovered over the cold metal handle. I was terrified of what I was about to find. I was terrified of what DeAndre had done. I threw the latch and pulled the steel door open. The air inside the hidden room was stale, smelling of antiseptic and despair. The walls were lined with thick, gray, soundproof foam panels. A single, harsh LED light burned in the ceiling, casting a clinical, unforgiving glare over the small space. In the corner, there was a narrow cot with a thin gray blanket. A small table held empty water bottles and wrappers. In the upper corner, a security camera's red eye blinked relentlessly. And curled up on the cot, facing the wall, was a fragile, emaciated figure. Dark, matted hair cascaded over thin, trembling shoulders. She was wearing a faded, oversized sweatshirt that swallowed her frame. My heart stopped beating. Time froze. "Aaliyah?" The name tore from my throat, a ragged, desperate whisper. The figure on the bed flinched violently, pulling her knees tightly to her chest. She didn't turn around. I stumbled forward, falling to my knees beside the cot. I reached out, my trembling hand gently touching her shoulder. "Aaliyah, baby, is it you?" Slowly, agonizingly, the girl turned her head. Her beautiful face was hollowed out, her cheekbones sharp and prominent beneath pale, bruised skin. Deep, dark circles haunted her large, terrified eyes. But beneath the starvation and the terror, it was her. It was my daughter. She stared at me, blinking rapidly against the harsh light, as if trying to decipher whether I was a hallucination. Her dry, cracked lips parted. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice so raspy it broke. "I'm here," I sobbed, collapsing forward and wrapping my arms around her fragile body. She felt like a bundle of hollow bones. "I'm here, baby. I've got you. Oh my God, Aaliyah, I've got you." She buried her face in my shoulder, her entire body shaking with deep, wrenching sobs that produced no sound. I held her, rocking her back and forth on the edge of the cot, my tears soaking into her matted hair. For 6 months, I had visited an empty grave. For 6 months, I had let the man sleeping upstairs comfort me while my only child was locked in a soundproof concrete box directly beneath our feet. "How?" I choked out, pulling back just enough to look at her beautiful, ruined face. "Aaliyah, what happened? The police said you crashed." She squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears spilling over her lashes. "I didn't crash, Mom. They ran me off the road. They pulled me out of the car and drugged me. I woke up here." "They?" My blood ran ice cold. "DeAndre? He did this?" She nodded weakly, her hands gripping my robe with a desperate, white-knuckled strength. "He comes down every few days, brings food. He told me you didn't care anymore. He said you were losing your mind, that you forgot I even existed. He said soon he wouldn't have to keep me alive as leverage anymore." The absolute depravity of it hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was torturing my child to ensure I had no heirs, breaking her spirit while he broke my mind. "I never forgot you," I whispered fiercely, pressing my forehead against hers. "He's been drugging me, baby, keeping me confused, but I'm awake now. I'm awake, and we are getting out of here." I moved to stand up, pulling her arm gently. "Come on. Can you walk? We have to leave right now before he wakes up." Aaliyah pulled back, a look of sheer, panicked terror crossing her face. "No! Mom, no, you can't!" "We have to go to the police, Aaliyah. Right now." "We can't," she pleaded, her voice a terrified hiss. She grabbed my wrists, her eyes darting toward the blinking red light of the security camera in the corner. "He has the cameras wired directly to his phone. If we try to leave the house, the perimeter alarms will wake him up. He has a gun, Mom. If he catches us trying to run, he'll kill us both and say it was an intruder. You don't understand. He isn't working alone." I froze, staring at the blinking red light. My brilliant, strategic daughter, even starved and broken, was right. The house was a fortress. If we triggered an alarm, we wouldn't make it to the front gate. DeAndre had the physical advantage, the weapons, and the legal upper hand. He would end us tonight, and the police would believe the grieving husband who was forced to defend himself against a home invasion. "Who is he working with?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Aaliyah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know his name, but I've heard DeAndre talking on the phone outside the door. There's a partner, someone who is funding all of this, someone who knows everything about the company." I looked around the sterile, padded cell. I looked at the daughter I had mourned and the blinking red eye of the camera recording our every move. We were trapped. Running was a death sentence. If we were going to survive, I couldn't just flee into the night. I had to destroy him from the inside out. I had to dismantle his life, his lies, and his partners, piece by piece, until he had absolutely nowhere left to hide. I looked back at Aaliyah, wiping the tears from her hollow cheeks. I let go of my fear, letting it harden into a cold, unbreakable resolve. "Okay," I whispered, my voice steady, vibrating with the quiet authority that had built an empire. "We stay, for now." I took her hands in mine. "I am going to go back upstairs. I am going to get back into that bed. Tomorrow morning I am going to smile at him, and I am going to let him think he is still winning." Aaliyah's eyes widened with fear. "Mom, you can't." "I have to," I said firmly. "I have to play the fool. It's the only way to find out who is helping him. I will bring you proper food. I will find a way to get a phone down here." But you have to trust me, Aaliyah. I built a kingdom from nothing. I can certainly tear one man down." I kissed her forehead, a promise sealed in the cold, damp air of the cellar. The matriarch wasn't just awake anymore. She was going to war. The hardest part about playing a ghost is remembering how to haunt your own life without making a sound. The morning sun crept across the Persian rug in my bedroom, a harsh reminder that the nightmare of the night before was entirely real. I sat at my vanity, staring at the woman in the mirror. For 35 years, that face had commanded boardrooms, intimidated politicians, and built a legacy. Now I had to willingly erase it. I practiced the physical mechanics of my own destruction. I let my shoulders slump, abandoning the perfect posture I had drilled into myself since childhood. I relaxed the muscles around my mouth until my jaw hung slightly slack. I unfocused my eyes, staring at the middle distance, forcing the sharp, analytical light of my mind behind a thick curtain of manufactured apathy. I had to be the broken, fading woman DeAndre thought he had created. If I slipped, if I showed even a flicker of the matriarch's true intellect, my daughter would die in the dark. The heavy oak door to the master suite clicked open. "Good morning, my love." DeAndre's voice floated into the room, accompanied by the clinking of porcelain and the scent of freshly brewed espresso. I didn't turn my head to look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on a small, meaningless smudge on the mirror. I forced my breathing to slow, mimicking the lethargy of the heavily sedated. "Did we sleep well?" he asked, his hands coming down to rest on my shoulders. His thumbs massaged the tense muscles at the base of my neck. Every fiber of my being recoiled at his touch. My skin crawled, my stomach churning with a violent mixture of hatred and disgust. I wanted to reach for the heavy silver hairbrush on the vanity and smash it across his perfect lying teeth. I wanted to scream Aaliyah's name until the walls shook. Instead, I let my head loll slightly to the side, leaning into his touch like a grateful, dependent invalid. "Sleep," I mumbled, my voice raspy and slow. "Yes, long sleep." "That's good, Joe," he purred, kissing the top of my head. "Dr. Vance said the new dosage would help with the agitation. You seem much calmer today." Calmer. He meant broken. He picked up the small dish. "Time for your morning regimen, sweetheart. We have a busy day today. Elias is coming over later to go over some quarterly reports. I know you won't want to sit through all those boring numbers, so I'm going to handle it. But he wants to say hello." Elias? Elias Thorne, my chief financial officer, my oldest friend, and the man who had stood by my side since we were drafting blueprints on napkins in a South Side diner. The mention of his name sent a sharp pang of grief through my chest. Elias was fiercely loyal. If I could just get a moment alone with him, if I could slip him a note, he would bring down the wrath of God on DeAndre. But I couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not until I knew who DeAndre's silent partner was. I couldn't trust anyone with Aaliyah's life hanging in the balance. "Elias," I repeated, letting the name trail off as if I couldn't quite remember the face attached to it. I furrowed my brow, acting deeply confused. "Who?" DeAndre's reflection in the mirror smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile of pure triumph. He actually believed he had wiped my oldest friend from my memory. "Don't worry your pretty head about it, Joe. I'll take care of everything," he said softly. He held out the 2 white pills. "Open up." This was the crucible, the moment of truth. I reached up with a trembling hand, taking the pills from his palm. I brought them to my lips, my hand shaking violently. I placed them in my mouth, immediately sweeping them deep under my tongue with a practiced flick. He handed me the water. I took a sip. Swallowing water while holding dry, chalky pills under your tongue without gagging requires a level of physical control I didn't know I possessed. The bitter, toxic taste immediately began to seep into my saliva. It tasted like ash and battery acid. I swallowed the water audibly, opened my mouth just wide enough to show the pills were no longer on my tongue, and handed the glass back. "Good girl," DeAndre praised, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Let's get you dressed." 2 hours later, I was seated in the formal dining room. The bitter taste of the pills was still lingering in my mouth, though I had spat them into a napkin the moment DeAndre turned his back to pick out my clothes. Elias Thorne sat across the table, his usually sharp, calculating eyes filled with an unbearable sorrow as he looked at me. He had brought a bouquet of white lilies, my favorites. She looks smaller, DeAndre," Elias said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. He reached across the polished mahogany table and gently squeezed my hand. I looked at his hand resting on mine. I wanted to squeeze back. I wanted to flip my hand over, dig my manicured nails into his palm, and scream for him to call the FBI. My heart shattered a little more as I forced my hand to remain entirely limp and unresponsive beneath his. It's the progression of the disease, Elias, DeAndre sighed, playing the part of the exhausted, tragic husband flawlessly. He set his iPad down and rubbed his temples. Dr. Vance warned us the physical decline would follow the cognitive one. Some days she doesn't even know who I am. It's just so fast, Elias murmured, pulling his hand back to wipe a sudden tear from the corner of his eye. 6 months ago, she was negotiating the riverfront acquisition. Now we have to protect what she built, DeAndre interrupted smoothly, shifting the conversation exactly where he wanted it. Which brings me to the offshore accounts, Elias. The medical bills, the private care facility I'm vetting for when she needs 24-hour specialized attention. The costs are astronomical. I need you to authorize the transfer of the liquid assets from the primary holding company to the Cayman accounts, just to shield them from the domestic tax burdens during this transition. My ears rang. The Cayman accounts. Untraceable. Once the money was there, it was gone forever. He was preparing to drain the company dry before he finally put a pillow over my face. I kept my eyes fixed on my bowl of cooling oatmeal, letting a small ribbon of drool escape the corner of my mouth to sell the performance. I wiped it away slowly with the back of my hand, like a confused toddler. DeAndre, transferring that volume of liquid capital offshore requires board approval, Elias said, his tone shifting from grieving friend back to cautious CFO. And Josephine's signature. I have the proxy, DeAndre reminded him, his voice hardening just a fraction. And as her husband and legal guardian, my signature is her signature. We don't have time for a board vote, Elias. The market is volatile, and her care is my top priority. I need you to execute the wire transfers by Friday. Friday. 4 days. That was my timeline. Once the money was gone, I had no leverage, and DeAndre would have no reason to keep Aaliyah alive in that cellar. I'll have my team look at the legalities, Elias conceded slowly, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to fight the grieving husband. I'll do my best, DeAndre, for Joe. Thank you, Elias, DeAndre smiled. She would appreciate it, if she could understand. He reached over and patted my cheek. I stared blankly at the wall, mentally recording every word, every nuance, every legal loophole he was trying to exploit. You think you are so smart, DeAndre. You think you are playing chess against a ghost, but the ghost was listening. Nighttime was my only sanctuary. It was the only time I could breathe, the only time I could take off the suffocating mask of dementia. It was 2 a.m. DeAndre had retreated to the guest suite hours ago, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand. I had waited until the rhythmic sound of his snoring drifted down the hallway before I moved. I crept down the grand staircase and slipped into the massive industrial kitchen. I moved with the silent, practiced grace of a phantom. I bypassed the noisy pantry doors and went straight for the emergency earthquake supplies Nia kept stocked in the lower cabinets. I grabbed 4 high-protein survival bars, a bottle of multivitamins, and 2 bottles of electrolyte water, shoving them deep into the oversized pockets of my robe. My daughter was starving, subsisting on whatever scraps DeAndre threw her way to keep her compliant. She needed strength. We both did. I navigated the dark corridors back to the east wing, my bare feet making no sound on the Persian rugs. I reached the cellar door, punched in the master override code, and slipped into the freezing subterranean dark. I pushed the heavy wine rack aside, the industrial casters groaning softly in protest. I threw the heavy steel latch and stepped into the stark, glaring light of the panic room. Aaliyah was awake, sitting cross-legged on the thin cot, staring at the door. When she saw me, a flicker of genuine hope broke through the hollow despair in her eyes. I moved to the blind spot beneath the blinking red camera, pulling her into the corner where the lens couldn't track us. I pulled the protein bars and water from my pockets, pressing them into her trembling hands. Eat, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. Slowly. Don't make yourself sick. She tore into the wrapper with terrifying desperation, her hands shaking as she ate. I watched her, my heart breaking all over again. Mom, she whispered between bites, her eyes darting toward the camera. Did he... Did he hurt you today? No, baby. He thinks I'm completely gone. He thinks he's won. I smoothed her matted hair away from her face. Listen to me, Aaliyah. He's planning to wire the company's liquid assets offshore by Friday. Once the money is gone, we are out of time. I need to know who his partner is. I need leverage. Aaliyah swallowed hard, taking a sip of the water. He doesn't bring his phone down here, but sometimes when he's angry, he talks to the camera, like he knows the partner is watching the feed. My blood ran cold. The partner wasn't just funding this. They were watching. They were monitoring my daughter's captivity in real time. He called him E, Aaliyah whispered, her brow furrowing as she tried to pull the memory from her traumatized brain. A few weeks ago, the ventilation system broke down here. It was suffocating. DeAndre came down furious. He looked right at the camera and said, "Tell E to send the maintenance crew, or the asset dies before we get the payout. E." My mind raced through my board of directors, my competitors, my legal team. Who was E? Edward from acquisitions? Evan from the zoning board? I need to get into his laptop, I murmured, more to myself than to her. It's biometric, fingerprint scanner on the keyboard, and a retinal scan on the study door. Aaliyah grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Mom, you can't. If the system flags an unauthorized entry, it locks down the hard drive and alerts him. You need his actual fingerprint. I stared into the dark corner of the concrete cell, the gears of my mind grinding with lethal precision. Then I suppose, I whispered, a cold, dark smile touching my lips for the first time in 6 months. I will just have to borrow his hand. I will just have to borrow his hand, I whispered, the cold reality of what I had to do settling over me like armor. I was about to explain my plan to Aaliyah when a sound cut through the silence of the subterranean room. It wasn't loud, just a soft electronic chirp, followed by the heavy metallic grinding of the wine rack moving on its industrial casters outside the steel door. Someone was coming down. Aaliyah's eyes went wide with a terror so profound it seemed to hollow out her face. She shoved my hands away. "Mom, hide! Hide!" she mouthed frantically, her voice completely gone. There was nowhere to go. The room was a 12 by 12 concrete box. There were no closets, no bathroom doors, no shadows deep enough to conceal a grown woman. The heavy steel latch on the outside of the door began to turn with a sickening clack. Driven by pure, unadulterated survival instinct, I dropped flat onto the freezing stone floor and shimmied underneath the narrow cot. The clearance was barely 10 inches. The rough concrete scraped the skin off my shoulders through my silk robe, and the dust immediately assaulted my sinuses. I pulled my arms in tight, pressing my face against the floor, and prayed to God my erratic breathing wouldn't give me away. Aaliyah instantly threw her legs over the side of the bed, letting the thin gray blanket drape down just far enough to brush the floor, concealing the gap where I lay hidden. The heavy steel door swung open, hitting the foam-padded wall with a dull thud. "Wake up, Sleeping Beauty," DeAndre's voice slurred slightly. It was thick, cruel, and completely devoid of the sugary sweetness he used upstairs. Through the narrow gap between the blanket and the floor, I watched his polished leather shoes step into the center of the room. He was swaying slightly. He had been drinking heavily. "Stand up," he barked. I heard the rusty springs of the cot groan in protest above me. Aaliyah stood. Her bare, bruised feet came into my line of sight, trembling violently against the cold stone just inches from my face. What do you want?" Aaliyah whispered, her voice cracking. "What do I want?" DeAndre chuckled, a dark, venomous sound. I saw his shoes step closer to her. "I want Friday to get here. I want your stubborn, brain-dead mother to officially sign her empire over so I don't have to spend another minute in this freezing basement looking at you." He took another step, closing the distance. My heart hammered against the floorboard so violently I was certain he could hear it. "But my partner," DeAndre continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is getting nervous. Elias dragging his feet on the wire transfers today spooked him. He wants proof of life. He wants to know my insurance policy is still breathing." Insurance policy, that's all my beautiful daughter was to them. Leverage. I saw DeAndre's shoes shift. He reached out. Above me, Aaliyah let out a sharp, breathless gasp as he grabbed a fistful of her matted hair, yanking her head back. It took every ounce of willpower, every shred of discipline I had cultivated over 64 years of life, not to roll out from under that bed and tear his throat out with my bare teeth. I bit down on my own forearm to muffle my heavy, furious breathing, tasting copper as my teeth broke the skin. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. If you move, you both die. Speak into the phone, DeAndre ordered. Tell E you're alive. Tell him the asset is secure. There was a tense silence. Then Aaliyah spoke, her voice shaking but laced with a defiant edge I recognized from her teenage years. I'm alive, but when my mother wakes up, you are both going to burn. DeAndre laughed, a harsh barking sound. He let go of her hair, shoving her backward. Aaliyah stumbled, her heels hitting the metal frame of the cot right next to my head. Your mother is a vegetable, Aaliyah. She's gone, DeAndre sneered. He turned toward the door. 3 more days. Then I'm going to come down here, turn off that camera, and finally tie up this loose end. The heavy steel door slammed shut. The latch clicked into place. The wine rack groaned as it was rolled back into position. Above me, Aaliyah collapsed onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, sobbing quietly. I slid out from under the cot, my silk robe covered in dust and concrete grit, my forearm bleeding. I pulled my daughter into my arms, holding her tightly until her shaking subsided. 3 days, I whispered into her hair, my voice vibrating with a lethal, icy calm. He thinks he has 3 days. He is wrong. I left the cellar and crept back upstairs to the guest wing. DeAndre had returned to his room. Through the heavy oak door, the rhythmic sound of his alcohol-induced snoring had resumed. I eased the door open. The room smelled of stale bourbon. On the mahogany nightstand, illuminated by the moonlight, sat an empty crystal tumbler. I moved silently to the nightstand. I opened my compact of setting powder, dipped a soft makeup brush into it, and lightly dusted the side of the crystal glass. A perfect, oily thumbprint appeared in the pale powder. DeAndre was vain and meticulous about his appearance, but he was sloppy with his environment. I peeled back a strip of clear packing tape I had taken from Nia's supply closet, pressed it firmly over the powdered thumbprint, and lifted it away. The biometric key to his kingdom, captured on a 2-inch piece of plastic. I left the room, slipping down the corridor toward his study in the east wing. The door to the study was locked, the biometric retinal scanner glowing an angry red. Aaliyah was right. The system was state-of-the-art. But DeAndre, in his arrogant assumption that he had outsmarted a dying woman, hadn't realized that the state-of-the-art system was wired into a 20-year-old localized power grid. I walked past the study to the end of the hall, opening a discreet wood-paneled utility closet. Inside was the archaic analog breaker box I had installed when I first bought the estate. I found the switch labeled East Wing, interior mag locks. I flipped the heavy switch. The red light on the retinal scanner instantly died. The magnetic lock on the heavy oak door disengaged with a heavy clack. I opened the study door, slipped inside, and flipped the breaker back on. The red light booted back up, locking me inside. The study was dark, lined with my first husband's antique books. On the massive leather-topped desk sat DeAndre's sleek silver laptop. I sat in his leather chair, opened the lid, and the screen flared to life, illuminating my face in the dark room. It demanded a fingerprint. My heart hammered in my chest. If this failed, the system would lock down. I carefully took the piece of packing tape, aligned the powdered thumbprint over the glass sensor on the keyboard, and pressed down firmly. The screen blinked. Scanning. I held my breath. Access granted. The desktop materialized. I didn't waste a second. I bypassed his standard files and went straight to his secure encrypted messaging app. The icon was hidden inside a folder labeled Architectural Drafts. He wasn't nearly as clever as he thought he was. I opened the application. There was only one contact thread. The name simply read, E. I scrolled up, my eyes scanning the months of correspondence. DeAndre, May 12th. The girl is secure. Found her on Route 41. Car staged. She's in the cellar. E. May 12th. Good. Begin the dosage on Josephine tomorrow. Do not rush it. We need the cognitive decline to look natural for Vance to sign off. My blood turned to ice. They had planned this for months. I scrolled further down, looking for the offshore wire transfer details. I needed to know where Elias was sending my money on Friday so I could intercept it. I found a PDF attachment labeled Cayman_routing_final. I opened it. The document outlined a complex web of shell companies designed to wash the money before depositing it into a master account in the Cayman Islands. But it was the initial seed funding that caught my eye. The money used to buy the drugs, hire the fake doctor, and install the soundproofing in my cellar. It had to come from somewhere domestic. I cross-referenced the dummy corporation on the routing slip, Vanguard Apex LLC, with my own backdoor access to the Sterling Real Estate corporate database. As CEO, I had master access to every vendor, contractor, and subsidiary we had ever paid. I typed the LLC name into my database. The search bar loaded. A name popped up on the screen. Registered agent and primary shareholder, Elias Thorne. The breath left my lungs in a violent rush. Elias Thorne. The man who had sat at my dining room table just hours ago. The man who had brought me white lilies. The man who had held my hand and wept over my fading mind, telling DeAndre how much he missed the woman I used to be. He was E. He was the architect of my destruction. He was the man who had ordered my daughter to be run off the road and locked in a concrete box. DeAndre wasn't the mastermind. DeAndre was just the handsome, charming executioner Elias had hired to infiltrate my life. I sat back in the leather chair, the glow of the screen washing over me in the silent, dark room. 30 years of friendship. 30 years of building an empire side by side. Why? I had made him a multimillionaire. I had named him godfather to Aaliyah. What could possess a man to harbor such a deep, cancerous hatred for a woman who had treated him like a brother? I looked back at the screen, my eyes scanning the earlier messages, looking for a motive. I found a message dated nearly a year ago, right before DeAndre had proposed to me. DeAndre, she agreed to marry me. The proxy will be easy once the drugs take effect. But what if Aaliyah finds the hard drive? E. Aaliyah won't find it. I wiped his office clean 15 years ago. Just focus on Josephine. She took my legacy. I am taking hers. 15 years ago. My mind snapped back, piercing through the decades. 15 years ago, my first husband, Marcus Sterling, Aaliyah's father, had died suddenly of a massive heart attack in his office. It was a tragedy that had nearly broken me. Elias had been the one to find him. Elias had been the one to hold me together at the funeral. She took my legacy. I closed the laptop, plunging the room back into total darkness. The fog was entirely gone now, replaced by a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity. I didn't just know who my enemies were. I knew that I was surrounded by them. Elias and DeAndre thought they were playing a long, brilliant game of chess against a dying queen. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that before I was a queen, I was a predator. I stood up from the desk, my silk robe billowing around my ankles like smoke. Friday was the day of reckoning. But it wasn't going to be my empire that burned. It was going to be theirs. I wiped the biometric scanner clean with the sleeve of my silk robe, erasing the last trace of DeAndre's stolen thumbprint, and stepped out of the study. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, plunging the corridor back into shadows. But the darkness in the house was nothing compared to the black abyss that had just opened up inside my chest. Elias Thorne. As I walked back to my bedroom, the ghosts of the past 30 years rose up to walk beside me in the dark. I thought about the early days. Before the billions, before the skyscrapers bearing the Sterling name. It was just the three of us in a cramped, unair-conditioned office on the south side of Chicago. Marcus, my first husband, was the visionary architect. I was the ruthless deal-maker who charmed the banks and gutted the competition. And Elias was the numbers guy, the quiet, meticulous accountant who kept the ledger balanced. Marcus and I were fire and lightning. We built the empire. Elias simply counted the bricks. I remembered the day 15 years ago when my world ended. Marcus had called me from his executive office. He sounded agitated, furious in a way I had rarely heard. He said he had found discrepancies in the accounts, deep systematic bleeds in our offshore development funds. He told me to come to the office immediately. He said he was going to fire Elias. By the time my driver navigated through the Chicago traffic and I reached the executive floor, the paramedics were already there. They told me it was a massive sudden myocardial infarction, a widowmaker heart attack. Marcus was 52 years old, ran 3 miles a day, and had a heart like an ox. But the coroner signed the death certificate. The board sent their condolences, and I buried the love of my life in the freezing November rain. Elias had been the one to catch me when my knees buckled at the gravesite. Elias had stepped up, taking over the day-to-day operations while I drowned in grief for a year. I had trusted him with my life. I had trusted him with my husband's legacy. She took my legacy, he had typed to DeAndre. I am taking hers. I reached my bedroom, slipping beneath the heavy duvet just as the first pale light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains. I didn't sleep. I lay there, letting the venom of Elias's betrayal course through my veins, hardening my heart into solid diamond. The next day was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I spent 12 hours playing the hollow shell of Josephine Sterling. DeAndre paraded me in front of the housekeeping staff, loudly lamenting my refusal to eat. He brought a notary to the house, holding my trembling hand as I scribbled an illegible, meaningless signature on a stack of minor administrative documents, a dress rehearsal for the grand theft scheduled for Friday. I smiled vacantly. I drooled. I stared at the walls. And inside, I calculated every single move of their execution. When 2 a.m. finally arrived and DeAndre's snores echoed from the guest wing, I rose from my bed. The air in the subterranean panic room felt colder tonight, heavy with the weight of the secrets it held. I handed Aaliyah another protein bar and a fresh bottle of water. She ate slower tonight, her body beginning to remember how to process sustenance. I waited until she had finished half the bottle of water before I spoke. I got into his laptop, I whispered, keeping my voice low so the camera's microphone wouldn't pick up the frequency. Aaliyah's eyes darted to mine, wide with a mixture of hope and terror. Did you find out who it is? Who is he? I took a slow, deep breath. The name tasted like poison on my tongue. It's Elias. Aaliyah froze. The half-eaten protein bar slipped from her fingers, tumbling onto the rough gray blanket. She stared at me, the color draining entirely from her face. Uncle Elias? She choked out, using the affectionate title she had called him since she was a toddler. Mom, no, that doesn't make any sense. He loves you. He basically raised me after Dad. Her voice trailed off. A horrifying realization swept across her hollowed features, snapping the pieces of a fragmented puzzle together in her mind. Her breathing hitched, turning into shallow, rapid gasps. Aaliyah, what is it? I asked, gripping her shoulders. The hard drive, she whispered, her eyes filling with hot, terrified tears. She looked at me, her entire body beginning to tremble. Mom, the hard drive I found before they took me. DeAndre mentioned a hard drive in his messages, I said urgently, leaning closer. What was on it, baby? Tell me. Aaliyah squeezed her eyes shut, fighting through the trauma to retrieve the memory. 6 months ago, I was managing the renovation of the old downtown headquarters, she began, her voice a fragile, shaking thread. We were preparing it for the 35th anniversary gala. I was clearing out Dad's old executive office, the one they sealed up after he passed. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I hadn't been able to step foot in that office for 15 years. There was a loose floorboard beneath his drafting table, Aaliyah continued, opening her eyes. Underneath it, there was a heavy, fireproof lockbox. It took me a week to guess the combination. Inside was an external hard drive. Dad was paranoid in the weeks before he died, Mom. You remember how erratic he was acting? She asked. I remembered. He had been working late, refusing to eat, pacing the halls at night. I thought it was just the stress of the new high-rise development. He wasn't stressed about the building, Aaliyah sobbed. He had hired a private forensic accounting firm to audit Elias. The hard drive had all the reports. Elias had been embezzling millions. He was funneling the money into a dummy corporation called Vanguard Apex. The name slammed into my chest. Vanguard Apex, LLC. The exact same shell company Elias was currently using to fund DeAndre's operation against me. He had kept the same weapon all these years. Dad confronted him, Aaliyah whispered, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Dad recorded the meeting. I listened to the audio file, Mom. Elias was begging. He said he just wanted a piece of the legacy he helped build. But Dad told him he was going to the police the next morning. He told Elias he was done. And the next morning, Marcus had a heart attack, I said, my voice dead, devoid of all emotion. It wasn't a heart attack, Aaliyah cried, gripping my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin. There were emails on that drive, Mom. Emails Elias sent from a burner account later that night. He reached out to a crisis management firm, a boutique law firm known for untraceable solutions for white-collar criminals. The puzzle pieces were aligning, clicking into place with the cold, heavy finality of a prison door slamming shut. He hired a fixer, I murmured. He hired an attorney who specialized in medical toxicology, Aaliyah corrected, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. A young, hungry, brilliant lawyer who knew how to procure a synthesized form of digitalis, a drug that mimics a massive myocardial infarction perfectly and dissolves in the bloodstream within hours, leaving no trace for the coroner. Aaliyah looked up at me, her dark eyes reflecting the amber glow of the lantern. The lawyer's name on the email chains. The man Elias paid to murder my father 15 years ago. It was DeAndre, I finished for her. The silence in the concrete room was deafening. It pressed against my eardrums, a physical pressure built on 15 years of lies, manipulation, and blood. DeAndre Rollins wasn't just a handsome, charming corporate attorney I had met at a charity gala 5 years ago. It hadn't been a chance encounter. He had murdered the love of my life 15 years ago. And then, a decade later, when Elias decided he didn't just want the embezzled millions, but wanted the entire Sterling Empire, he had called his favorite assassin back to finish the job. DeAndre had courted me, comforted me, married me, and slept in my bed, all while laughing with Elias about the man they had buried. I found the drive, Aaliyah wept, burying her face in her hands. I copied the files. I was driving to the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. I swear, Mom, I was going to give it to them. But a black SUV ran me off the road into the tree line. DeAndre pulled me out of the wreckage. He jammed a needle into my neck, and I woke up here. She looked up at me, completely shattered. He took the drive, Mom. They destroyed the only proof we had. We have nothing. They won. I reached out, taking my daughter's face in my hands. I wiped the tears from her bruised cheeks with my thumbs. I didn't feel the cold of the cellar anymore. I didn't feel the weakness in my muscles from the weeks of sedation. I felt nothing but the pure, unadulterated fire of vengeance. They destroyed a hard drive, I said, my voice smooth, calm, and terrifyingly steady. But they made a fatal mistake, Aaliyah. What? She sniffled. They let me wake up. I stood up from the cot. I looked at the blinking red light of the camera in the corner of the room. I knew Elias and DeAndre weren't watching the feed right now, but it didn't matter. Friday is not just about the money anymore, I said, looking down at my daughter. Friday is the day we balance the ledger. For your father. For you. For every single breath they have stolen from this family. I reached into the deep pocket of my robe and pulled out a small, black, rectangular object. I handed it to Aaliyah. It was a burner phone. Keep it turned off, I instructed, my eyes locking with hers. Keep it hidden inside the mattress. Do not turn it on until exactly 9 a.m. on Friday morning. When you do, you are going to dial the number saved in the contacts, and you are going to say exactly what I tell you to say. Aaliyah took the phone, her hands trembling as she looked at the small device. It was her lifeline to the outside world. It was the detonator for the bomb I was about to build. Who is the number for? She asked, looking up at me. A slow, dark smile curved my lips. An old friend. Someone who owes the Sterling family a very, very large debt. By Wednesday morning, the countdown in my head was deafening. 2 days until Friday. 2 days until Elias and DeAndre intended to execute the final wire transfers, drain my empire, and dispose of the loose ends in the cellar. I sat in my wheelchair in the center of the kitchen, staring blankly at the marble island. DeAndre was leaning against the counter, sipping an espresso and scrolling through his phone. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. Why wouldn't he? He had murdered my first husband 15 years ago without leaving a single fingerprint, and now he was days away from swallowing my entire life whole. You know, Joe, I was thinking, DeAndre said, not looking up from his screen. Dr. Vance mentioned that screen time can exacerbate your confusion. The blue light, the overstimulation. It's not good for your fragile state. I've already put your laptop and tablet in the safe. I think it's best if I hold on to your phone, too. He reached into the pocket of my silk robe and smoothly extracted my iPhone. He didn't ask, he just took it. I let my jaw hang slightly open, blinking slowly at him as if trying to process the concept of a phone. I offered no resistance. Perfect, he smiled, dropping my phone into his tailored suit pocket. Now you can just rest, no distractions. He thought he was cutting my vocal cords. He thought he was isolating me from the rest of the planet, locking me in a digital prison to match Aaliyah's concrete one. But DeAndre, for all his lethal cunning, was fundamentally arrogant. He didn't understand that when you build a house from the ground up, You know exactly where all the hidden doors are. I have a conference call with Elias in the study, DeAndre announced, setting his espresso cup in the sink. I need to finalize the routing numbers for Friday. Stay right here, Joe. Don't wander off and hurt yourself. He patted my head like a golden retriever and walked out of the kitchen. I waited until I heard the heavy oak door of the East Wing study click shut. I had exactly 12 minutes before his call ended. I didn't wheel myself. I stood up. My legs were stronger today. The vitamins and the absence of his chemical poison were rapidly repairing my nervous system. I walked swiftly and silently across the kitchen to the massive state-of-the-art smart refrigerator. It was a top-of-the-line model with a built-in tablet interface designed to manage groceries, leave digital sticky notes, and display family calendars. To DeAndre, it was just an expensive appliance. To me, it was an unsecured hardwired access point to the local area network. I tapped the upper right corner of the screen 7 times rapidly, accessing the developer options. A diagnostic keyboard popped up. I typed in the IP address of my personal hidden server, a ghost server I had maintained for decades to store highly sensitive corporate acquisitions data, completely entirely separated from the Sterling corporate grid. The screen blinked, loading a bare-bones HTML email portal. I didn't have time to write a novel. I had to be precise, and I had to reach the only man on Earth who owed me enough to risk his career on a cryptic message from a smart fridge. Special Agent Michael Trenton. 10 years ago, Trenton was a rising star in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He had stumbled onto a massive money laundering syndicate connected to the Chicago mob. The cartel had framed him, freezing his assets, threatening his family, and nearly destroying his life. I had used my billions, my private security contractors, and my shadow ledgers to quietly dismantle the cartel's financial backing, clearing his name and saving his family's lives. He had looked me in the eye and told me if I ever needed a favor, no matter how impossible, I only had to call. I typed his direct secure email address into the recipient line. Message: Trenton, it's Joe. I am being held hostage in my own home by DeAndre Rollins and Elias Thorne. Aaliyah is alive. They are holding her in a soundproof cellar beneath my East Wing. They have been drugging me to fake Alzheimer's. Friday at 9 a.m., DeAndre is bringing a fake doctor and nurse to the estate to sign my commitment papers and steal the company. Do not raid the house early. He will kill her. Intercept his hired medical team on Friday morning. Take their place. Wait for my signal. I read the message once, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I hit send. I immediately cleared the cache, exited the developer mode, and returned the screen to the digital grocery list. I grabbed the edge of the counter, steadying myself as I walked back to my wheelchair and sat down just as the kitchen door swung open. DeAndre walked back in, looking frustrated. Elias is getting cold feet about the secondary routing numbers, he muttered, opening the fridge to grab a bottle of sparkling water. He glanced at the touchscreen, right where my message had been seconds before. He saw nothing but a reminder to buy organic milk. I'll handle him. He doesn't have the stomach for the final act. I stared blankly at my cold tea, a predatory thrill coursing through my veins. The trap was set. Now I just needed someone on the inside to help me spring it. At 2 p.m., DeAndre left the house. He said he had to meet with Elias in person to straighten his spine. It was the first time I had been left alone in the house without his suffocating presence in weeks. I wheeled myself out of the living room, down the long hallway, and into the service wing. I pushed the door to the laundry room open. Nia looked up from the ironing board, startled. "Mrs. Sterling," she said quickly, setting the hot iron down. She immediately walked over to me, her eyes filled with that same unbearable, pitying sorrow everyone else gave me. "You shouldn't be out of bed without Mr. Rollins. Here, let me help you back." She reached for the handles of my wheelchair. I reached up and grabbed her wrists. My grip was like a steel vice. Nia gasped, her eyes widening in pure shock. I didn't just hold her hands. I stood up. I rose from the wheelchair, towering over her, my posture perfectly straight, the terrifying aura of the Sterling matriarch radiating from every pore. "Mrs. Sterling?" Nia breathed, taking a terrified step backward. You're... "I am entirely lucid, Nia," I said, my voice low, sharp, and commanding. "And we do not have much time." Nia's hands flew to her mouth. To her credit, she didn't scream. Tears instantly welled in her eyes, spilling over her cheeks as she looked at me. "Oh, thank God," she wept, her voice trembling. "I knew it. I knew he was doing something to you. The pills. I tried to knock them away whenever I could, but he was always watching. I know, I said, my expression softening just a fraction. You saved my life the other night when you dropped the tray, but I need you to do exactly what I say now, Naya. Aaliyah is alive. Naya stopped breathing. The color drained from her face. Aaliyah? But the police? She is locked in the wine cellar, I said coldly. DeAndre and Elias Thorne have been keeping her there for 6 months. They are planning to kill us both on Friday once the offshore transfers clear. Nia grabbed the edge of the ironing board, looking like she might faint. Mr. Thorne? But he's your friend. He is a parasite, I corrected sharply. And we are going to burn him out. But I cannot do this without you. DeAndre watches my every move. I need eyes and hands that he ignores. Naya swallowed hard, wiping the tears from her face. She looked at me, the shock slowly morphing into a fierce, protective anger. She had practically helped raise Aaliyah. Tell me what you need me to do. Friday morning at 8:45 a.m., a car will arrive at the front gate, I instructed, my tone purely business. It is supposed to be Dr. Vance and a private nurse, hired by DeAndre to sign my commitment papers. But if my message got through, the people in that car will be undercover FBI agents. How will I know it's them? Naya asked, her voice steadying. They will ask for entry to the East Wing Conservatory instead of the front door, I said. When they do, you open the main gates, but you must manually disable the driveway security cameras from the gatehouse panel. DeAndre will be in this living room with me and Elias. He cannot see them approach the house on his phone. I can do that, Nia nodded firmly. What else? I stepped closer, lowering my voice even further. DeAndre is arrogant, but he is not stupid. When the trap springs, he will realize he is cornered. Men like him do not surrender peacefully. He keeps a licensed firearm in the house, doesn't he? Nia shuddered. Yes, a 9mm Glock. He keeps it in the biometric safe in the guest suite closet. He opens it every morning when he gets dressed to check it. He leaves the safe open while he showers? I asked. Yes. Tomorrow morning, while he is in the shower, you are going to go into that room, I said, my eyes locking onto hers, ensuring she understood the gravity of the task. You are going to take the magazine out of that weapon. You are going to empty every single hollow point bullet into your pocket, and you are going to put the empty magazine back inside the gun. Nia's eyes widened. If he checks, he won't check the magazine, I said with absolute certainty. He'll check to see the gun is there, and he'll lock the safe. But when Friday comes and he reaches for it, I want him holding 3 pounds of useless metal. Nia took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked at the ironing board, at the luxurious shirt of the man who had brought a nightmare into our home. Then she looked back at me, her jaw setting with a steely resolve. I'll empty it, she promised. Every last bullet. I placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. They thought they could turn my house into my tomb, Nia. We are going to show them exactly whose house they are standing in. I sat back down in the wheelchair, immediately slumping my shoulders and letting my eyes go vacant, just as the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoed from outside. DeAndre was back. The pieces were on the board. The invisible network was fully operational. Now all we had to do was wait for Friday. Friday morning arrived not with the warmth of the sun, but with the cold, steel-gray promise of a reckoning. I sat in my wheelchair, positioned near the roaring fireplace in the grand living room. The heat washed over my face, but my blood was ice cold. Today was the day. Today, DeAndre and Elias planned to strip the Sterling name from my bones, lock me in a psychiatric ward, and bury my daughter permanently in the cellar beneath our feet. I was dressed in a pale cashmere sweater and a thick wool blanket draped over my lap. DeAndre had chosen the outfit. He wanted me to look frail, comfortable, and utterly defeated for the doctor's final assessment. Just breathe, Joe, DeAndre murmured, pacing the length of the Persian rug. He was wearing a dark, bespoke suit, looking every inch the powerful, grieving husband stepping up to carry the burden of his wife's tragic decline. He checked his Rolex for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Vance should be here soon. Then this will all be over. Yes, it will, I thought, my eyes fixed blankly on the dancing orange flames. The heavy mahogany double doors of the living room opened. Elias Thorne walked in. Elias, DeAndre greeted him, a tight, predatory smile stretching across his face. Do you have the paperwork? Elias didn't look at him immediately. He looked at me. He stared at the woman he had helped build an empire with, the woman whose husband he had murdered 15 years ago. I kept my face slack, letting a tiny tremor shake my left hand. I wanted him to see a ghost. I wanted him to feel the full weight of the hell he had constructed. "I have it," Elias said, his voice unusually hoarse. He snapped the golden latches of his briefcase open. The offshore wire transfers are queued in the Vanguard Apex master account, $52 million in liquid assets. But the Cayman Bank's compliance division placed a 24-hour hold on the routing. They won't release the funds without the finalized, notarized medical proxy and Dr. Vance's declaration of Josephine's total incompetence. "Which is exactly why Vance is arriving in 15 minutes, DeAndre said smoothly, stepping up to the coffee table. He looked down at the stacks of crisp white legal documents. "Once he signs off and the notary stamps it, we upload the PDF to the portal, and the money vanishes into the Caymans. Untraceable." Elias swallowed hard, his eyes darting back to me. "And Aaliyah? What happens to the girl today, DeAndre?" DeAndre's smile vanished. His eyes turned flat, dead, and entirely devoid of humanity. "I told you to let me handle the loose ends, Elias. You just push the button on the money. Once the transfer clears at 9 a.m., I'll go down to the cellar. It will be painless. We'll move her body tonight. No one is ever going to find her." My heart stopped. He wasn't even going to wait. He was going to execute my daughter the moment the money left Chicago. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair beneath the wool blanket, my knuckles turning white. "This has gone too far," Elias whispered, running a trembling hand over his face. "Marcus was one thing. He was going to ruin us both. But the girl, I watched her grow up, DeAndre." "You watched her grow up while you counted Josephine's pocket change," DeAndre hissed, stepping into Elias's personal space, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You hired me, Elias. You brought me into this house to poison her, to steal her life, just like you stole Marcus's. You don't get to grow a conscience on payday. You want your legacy? You sign the damn papers." Elias stared at DeAndre, the reality of the monster he had unleashed finally reflecting in his eyes. But greed is a cancer that devours everything, including regret. Elias looked away, his jaw hardening. He pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket and laid it precisely next to the commitment documents. "Just get Vance here," Elias muttered. At 8:45 a.m. precisely, the intercom on the wall chimed softly. "Yes?" Nia asked, her voice steady. "This is Dr. Vance and my attending nurse," a deep, authoritative voice crackled through the speaker. "We are here for the assessment in the East Wing Conservatory." The code phrase. Nia didn't hesitate. Her hand flew to the secondary security panel beneath the intercom. With 3 rapid keystrokes, she disabled the live feed of the front gate cameras that beamed directly to DeAndre's phone. Then she pressed the heavy brass button to open the wrought iron estate gates. "Please proceed to the front door, Doctor," Nia said. In the living room, DeAndre's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning slightly at the screen. "The gate just opened, but the camera feed is buffering. Damn winter storms." He shoved the phone back into his pocket and turned to Elias. "They're here. Look sharp." I focused my eyes on the heavy mahogany doors, my heart beating so hard it bruised my ribs. Aaliyah was in the cellar, clutching the burner phone. Nia was in the hallway, having already emptied the bullets from DeAndre's gun upstairs. The board was set. Nia opened the living room doors. "Mr. Rollins, Dr. Vance, and the nurse have arrived." "Dr. Vance." DeAndre stepped forward, extending his hand with that flawless, charming smile. "Thank you for coming all this way in the cold. I know it's highly irregular to do the final assessment at the estate, but my wife's condition has deteriorated so rapidly. Transporting her to the clinic would be too traumatic." The older man shook DeAndre's hand firmly. "Of course, Mr. Rollins, we understand the sensitivity of the situation. This is my attending psychiatric nurse, Ms. Carter. She'll be witnessing the signatures and assisting with the evaluation." The nurse, Ms. Carter, nodded curtly. She didn't smile. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on Elias, then on the briefcase of documents, and finally, they locked onto me. For a fraction of a second, her sharp, dark eyes flashed with an intense, unspoken communication. "We are here." I blinked once, letting my head loll back against the wheelchair. "Let's get straight to it then," DeAndre said, gesturing toward the coffee table. "Elias Thorne, my wife's CFO, is here to oversee the legal transition of the estate. We have the medical proxy and the involuntary commitment forms ready. We just need your final declaration of incompetence, doctor, and her attempted signature." "Very well," the doctor said, setting his medical bag on the table. He walked over to me, pulling a small pen light from his pocket. He clicked it on and shined it gently into my eyes. I stared blankly through the light, playing the perfect broken victim. "Josephine," the doctor said loudly, speaking to me as if I were deaf. "Can you tell me your name? Can you tell me what year it is?" I mumbled something incoherent, a slow string of vowels that meant nothing, letting my chin rest heavily on my chest. "She's been completely nonverbal since yesterday evening," DeAndre supplied helpfully, standing close behind my wheelchair. "The new dosage of lorazepam you prescribed has kept her sedated, but the dementia is completely taking over." "I see," the doctor murmured, clicking the pen light off. He turned back to the table, pulling a thick stack of medical forms from his bag. He signed his name at the bottom of 3 separate pages with a flourish. "It is my professional medical opinion that Josephine Sterling is in the advanced final stages of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She lacks all executive function and legal capacity. Mr. Rollins, as her husband, you are now her sole legal proxy." DeAndre exhaled a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Elias, his eyes burning with triumphant greed. "Did you hear that, Elias? It's done." Elias's hands shook as he took the medical forms from the doctor and placed them on top of the wire transfer authorizations. He opened his laptop, typing furiously. "I am attaching the PDFs to the Cayman portal now, but the bank requires one last physical action for compliance on a transfer this large. Josephine has to make an attempt to sign the final line of the proxy, witnessed by the medical staff, to prove she is physically present and surrendering her agency." "She can barely hold a spoon, Elias," DeAndre scoffed. "It doesn't have to be legible," Elias said, his voice tight. "Just a mark, an X, anything." Put the pen in her hand. DeAndre picked up the heavy gold Mont Blanc pen. He walked around to the front of my wheelchair. He knelt down, bringing his face level with mine. Up close, I could see the absolute, thrilling euphoria in his eyes. He had won. He had defeated the great Josephine Sterling, stolen her billions, and he was about to become a king. "Here you go, Joe," DeAndre whispered, his voice dripping with venomous sweetness. He took my right hand, prying my fingers open, and forced the heavy gold pen into my palm. "Just one last signature, sweetheart. Right here on the dotted line. Then you can rest forever." He placed the thick stack of papers on my lap. I held the pen. I looked down at the paper. I looked at the line that would sign away my entire life, my company, and my daughter's future. My hand shook violently. I let out a soft, confused whimper, and then I opened my fingers. The heavy gold pen slipped from my grasp, tumbling off my lap and hitting the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp clatter. It rolled under the coffee table. DeAndre sighed, a harsh, irritated sound. "Damn it, Joe." He started to bend down to retrieve it. "Allow me, mister." "Rollins," Nurse Carter said sharply, stepping forward. DeAndre paused, letting the nurse kneel in front of my wheelchair. She reached under the table, her gloved hand closing around the gold pen. But she didn't stand up immediately. Instead, she remained kneeling. She looked up, her dark, piercing eyes locking directly onto mine. The cold clinical detachment of the nurse vanished completely, replaced by the lethal, hyper-focused intensity of a federal predator who had just cornered her prey. She didn't hand the pen back to DeAndre. She reached her left hand to the collar of her medical scrubs. With a swift, sharp motion, she ripped the Velcro seam open, revealing the thick, black Kevlar tactical vest hidden underneath. Emblazoned across the chest of the vest in stark white block letters were 3 initials. F. B.I. Nurse Carter stood up, dropping the gold pen onto the stack of legal documents on my lap. She didn't look at me anymore. She turned her terrifying gaze entirely onto DeAndre Rollins, her right hand dropping smoothly to the heavy black service weapon holstered on her hip. "DeAndre Rollins," Special Agent Carter said, her voice ringing out through the grand living room like the toll of a funeral bell. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, kidnapping, and the unlawful detention of Aaliyah Sterling." The room froze. Time itself seemed to stop. DeAndre's triumphant smile shattered into a million pieces. He stared at the Kevlar vest, his brain entirely unable to process the catastrophic reality unfolding in front of him. Elias Thorne gasped, stumbling backward away from the coffee table, his laptop crashing to the floor. "What?" DeAndre stammered, stepping back, his hands raising instinctively. "What is this? Who the hell are you?" The doctor, standing by the table, calmly reached into his suit jacket, pulling out his own badge and weapon, leveling it directly at Elias's chest. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Thorne. Step away from the computer." "This is a mistake," DeAndre yelled, his voice cracking with sudden explosive panic. He looked at me, still slumped in the wheelchair. "My wife is sick." "She has dementia. Who called you? You have no jurisdiction here." I looked at the man who had murdered my first husband. I looked at the man who had locked my daughter in a concrete box. I looked at the man who had fed me poison for 6 months. I reached up, grabbed the heavy wool blanket covering my legs, and threw it onto the floor. "No one called them, DeAndre," I said, my voice crystal clear, vibrating with an absolute terrifying authority that echoed off the stone walls. "I sent them an email." DeAndre's eyes bulged. He stared at me, his jaw working uselessly, his mind short-circuiting as the illusion of my dementia evaporated before his very eyes. "You," he whispered, his face draining of all blood. "You were asleep. You were—" "I have been wide awake for 3 days, you arrogant, murderous son of a bitch," I hissed, taking a step toward him. "Did you really think you could walk into my house, poison my tea, lock my child in a cage, and I wouldn't notice?" "DeAndre!" Elias screamed, pure terror seizing his body. She knows everything." DeAndre's eyes darted wildly around the room. He looked at the 2 armed FBI agents. He looked at the shattered laptop on the floor. He looked at the doors. He realized in a split second of animalistic panic that his life was over. The money was gone. The empire was gone. His charming facade vanished, revealing the violent, desperate cornered animal beneath. "You think you've won?" DeAndre roared. He lunged backward toward the hallway, moving with terrifying speed. He wasn't running for the front door. He was running for the guest suite upstairs. He was running for the biometric safe. He was running for his gun. "Stop, FBI, drop to the ground," Agent Carter roared, her weapon drawn as she sprinted after DeAndre. But DeAndre was fueled by the pure, unadulterated adrenaline of a man who was watching his entire life turn to ash. He bounded up the marble staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, his expensive suit jacket flaring out behind him. He was running for the guest suite. He was running for the biometric safe in his closet. Elias Thorne had collapsed onto his knees in the living room, sobbing uncontrollably, as the older FBI agent firmly locked a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Josephine, please," Elias wept, his face pressed against the Persian rug. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked down at the man who had ordered the murder of my husband 15 years ago. "You will be," I said coldly. I turned away from Elias and walked slowly toward the staircase. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. Queens do not run in their own castles. Upstairs, the sound of a heavy door slamming echoed through the corridor, followed instantly by the heavy thud of Agent Carter kicking it open. "Drop the weapon! Drop it right now!" Agent Carter's voice was a lethal command. I reached the top of the stairs and walked down the hall, stopping just outside the open door of the guest suite. DeAndre held the gun, the barrel sweeping erratically between Agent Carter and the doorway where I stood. "Back off!" DeAndre screamed, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of his usual smooth charm. The mask was completely gone. "I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll shoot her right now. Get out of my house." "This isn't your house, DeAndre," I said softly, stepping fully into the doorway. "Shut up!" he roared, leveling the dark barrel of the Glock directly at my chest. His finger trembled on the trigger. "You ruined everything. You were supposed to die. You were supposed to fade away and leave the money to me." "You tried to erase my mind," I said, my voice steady, staring straight down the barrel of his gun without blinking. "You locked my daughter in a concrete cage. You killed the only man I ever truly loved." "And now I'm going to kill you!" DeAndre screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure, desperate hatred. He closed his eyes. He pulled the trigger. Click. The sharp, metallic, empty sound echoed through the bedroom like a thunderclap. DeAndre froze. His eyes snapped open. He stared at the gun in his hand as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. Panic seized his features. He racked the slide frantically, pulling the trigger again. Click, 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 click. The gun was completely, utterly empty. What is this?" he stammered, dropping the useless weapon to the floor, stumbling backward until his back hit the closet door. "Looking for these, Mr. Rollins?" Naya asked, her voice calm and remarkably steady. She turned her hand over. 15 heavy, hollow-point 9mm bullets cascaded from her palm, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp, rhythmic clatter that sounded like the ticking of a clock running out of time. They rolled across the floor, stopping right at DeAndre's expensive Italian leather shoes. DeAndre stared at the bullets, the devastating realization finally crushing the last ounce of fight out of him. He looked at Nia, the housekeeper he had dismissed, abused, and tried to fire for months. He looked at me, the woman he had underestimated to his own ruin. "You," he whispered, sinking to his knees, his hands covering his face as a pathetic, broken sob escaped his throat. Agent Carter didn't hesitate. She holstered her weapon, rushed forward, and slammed DeAndre face first into the hardwood floor, wrenching his arms behind his back. The heavy ratcheting sound of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "DeAndre Rollins, you have the right to remain silent." Agent Carter read his rights, her knee pressed firmly into his spine. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I didn't stay to listen to the rest. I turned on my heel and walked back down the stairs. The FBI had secured the perimeter. Local police sirens were already wailing in the distance, screaming down the private road toward the estate. I walked past Elias, who was still weeping on the floor of the living room. I walked straight to the east wing. I punched the master override code into the wine cellar keypad. The heavy oak door swung open. "Mom," Aaliyah sobbed, burying her face into my neck, her tears hot against my skin. I heard the sirens. I heard them. "It's over, baby," I whispered fiercely, holding my daughter tighter than I ever had in her entire life. "It's over. We won. They are going away forever, and they are never ever going to touch you again." We sat on the floor of the cold cellar, holding each other, until the paramedics finally came down the stairs to take her into the light. It has been 8 months since the FBI raided my home. The trials were swift, brutal, and highly public. The media called it the boardroom betrayal of the century. DeAndre Rollins was convicted of first-degree murder for the death of my husband Marcus 15 years ago, armed with the digital evidence recovered by FBI cyber experts from Elias's destroyed hard drives. He was also convicted of kidnapping, attempted murder, and massive financial fraud. He will spend the rest of his natural life in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Elias Thorne, the man who had sat at my table, kissed my cheek, and funded my destruction, was sentenced to 45 years for conspiracy, kidnapping, and embezzlement. He lost his reputation, his freedom, and his legacy. My empire remained completely intact. The $52 million never left Chicago. Aaliyah spent 3 months in intense physical and psychological therapy. The darkness of that cellar left scars that will take years to fully heal, but she is her mother's daughter. She did not break. She took her trauma and forged it into a weapon. Together, we established the Sterling Foundation for Domestic Independence. We provide aggressive legal representation, immediate financial relocation, and private security for women who are victims of financial abuse, medical gaslighting, and domestic manipulation. We fight for the women whose partners try to steal their voices and their sanity. Nia, our courageous housekeeper, retired with a multi-million-dollar pension from my personal accounts. She now lives in a beautiful beachfront home in Florida, far away from the cold Chicago winters. They say the mind is the first thing to go. They say you should trust the people who smile at you, the people who pour your tea, the people who claim to have your best interests at heart. But I learned the hardest lesson a woman can learn. The most dangerous monsters do not hide in the dark. They sleep in our beds. They sit in our boardrooms. They use our love and our grief as weapons against us. If you ever feel the fog rolling in, if you ever feel like your reality is slipping, like your memory is failing, like the people around you are treating you like a ghost in your own life, do not just accept it. Question the medicine. Question the locked doors. Look for the broken pieces of jade on the floor. Your intuition is a survival instinct passed down through thousands of generations of women who had to fight to stay alive. Listen to it. Trust it. Because when the fog finally lifts, you need to be wide awake, and you need to be ready to fight.